So that first question actually uses the word survive, is how do I survive? Activities are restricted and my cash runway is being depleted by the day. So Patrick?
I think there are two parts to this question, right? I think the first part is really how do we address the cash runway first, right? I think prior to this COVID situation, as I would always advise all startups, that you really got to plan for the runway for at least 12 to 18 months, right? Precisely for this reason, because you do not know whether this kind of difficult situation will appear, right? And this COVID is a perfect example of that. So you got to plan for 12 to 18 months. And with that, if you are successful in your first round of fundraising, you should start to plan and start to execute on your second round. So there's a lot of saying within the VC industry that fundraising is a full-time job, right? So as a founder, you got to fundraise every now and then, right? So how do you survive when the cash runway is depleted by the day? You got to plan first and look at what is the impact of this COVID on your cash flow, and you make a plan and you execute the plan, right? Either by cutting expenses or you look for alternative revenue or like what Prof Myint mentioned, all right, you can approach your suppliers and approach your vendors. So one of the startups that we are working with, in fact, went to the vendor, and because they're working so closely, the vendor has a vested interest to make sure that the startup doesn't go down. So in the end, the vendor actually invested.
Yes, no, that's the key. So I think from my experience, every one of the companies I'm involved with has been told to do a COVID-19 strategy, both short-term and long-term. And in terms of cash flow management, there are 4 or 5 things I ask them to do. The first is look at the revenue they're getting and focus on the margins, because so many startups are actually just looking at revenue. They're not looking at the margins. And if you are doing contracts that actually are costing you money because you think you are looking for the long term, then you need to deprioritize those contracts, prioritizing the ones that are actually going to give you money to spend right now. I agree with you about the runway. I must admit, since I have a slightly different experience in terms of the biotech space, it's lucky that most companies actually have a 6-month runway, never mind an 18-month runway. But so I tend to go for, can we eke things out for at least the next 6 months? But of course, that may not be long enough for this, at least this financial crisis to last. They also have to incentivize upfront payments. So, if you get all your customers to either pay upfront or on the basis that the goods will come, and that actually does work sometimes. It's counterproductive, but counterintuitive, but it goes along the same lines as customers also want you to survive. So that occasionally that does work. Not always, but if it's an MNC that says, look, we have the cash now, then they will actually pay upfront. So we've had a few companies that have been paid. I'm also recommending borrow. Loans have never been so cheap. Okay, so if you look at interest rates, they are plummeting. Okay, so this is the time to borrow. Okay, you still have to convince the banks that you have a viable business, but of course the banks are also being incentivized to give out loans, as we are doing in Singapore. So now is also the time to borrow. You also have to believe in your, I'm not going to suggest you borrow if you don't think you can pay it back just to keep yourself going. But if you think, this is going to be a 6-month blip or a 9-month blip, and you just need money to tide you over, then just take a loan. And again, a lot of companies aren't thinking of that. I also get them to reevaluate what they actually need. Do you really need a chief marketing officer right now? Can you furlough them? Okay, furlough is a term not to sack them, but just put them on a temporary holiday measure, as it were. And give you furlough money, so you get some percentage of their salary paid for. So do consider furloughing your staff as much as you can. And I think the big opportunity here is also reevaluate your strategy. Is your business strategy now fit for purpose? at least for the next 12 to 18 months. So you've got time at home to re-strategize. So that, for me, those are the 5 or 6 elements of trying to get up, managing your cash flow during this period. Okay, I think we sort of answered a little bit the next, but it's more than just finances. What are the key things for start to focus on during a crisis like this? So again, Patrick.
I think for me, it will be two parts, right? One is really the cash flow, because I've seen many instances where the expansion plan has gone well, the execution is done properly, but they forgot about the cash flow, right? So I think, to me, that is very important, and I think we have spoken a lot on that. You really got to plan for it, not just now, but also for the future. Number 2, it's really for a crisis like this, it's a perfect opportunity for expansion. Things are cheaper, interest rates are lower, and you can get talent at a lower cost as well. And people are willing, right, to try out different things, right, given that the situation is so volatile. And the fact that this whole situation came about, what it means is that people are more open-minded, right, to look at new technology as well. So if you are into new technology, this might be a great time for you. And this could be a great time for some form of consolidation as well, if you have the relevant cash flow.
Okay, very good. Alvin, since you have to look after your own companies as well, you invest in, what are you suggesting?
Pretty much, I think, very much agree with what Patrick has said, in the sense whereby I think if everybody else is on survival mode, and if the startup is already in a bad position, why not make the best use of this time to expand? Talent's a lot cheaper. I mean, and I think a lot more people are keen to try out new technologies, especially, for example, I think automation may come back to be to take up a larger importance post-COVID in itself, because a lot of us are stuck at home, and at the same time, certain industries still needs to go on producing goods and services in itself, because we are starting to see supply chains being affected in itself. So I guess this could be a good time to expand, but I understand not all startups are in that viable and viable position in itself. So survive as best as you can, but if you've already addressed the issue for survival, then time to expand, man. Totally. I mean, cheap loans, cheap talent, go for it. As in, yeah, or try out new directions as well. I think this could also be a good time for potential new business models, and yeah, itself, yeah.
So probably there are 3 things I would add to what Alvin and Patrick have said. The first is, if you don't have an e-commerce strategy, you better develop one now. Okay, so that's going to be important. Singapore, apparently the e-commerce market is only 5% of the commercial marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
China is 25%. So we've a long way to go, e-commerce being very important for Singapore. The second thing I would say is maintain and develop the relationships you've already got. Okay, because you're going to need them when we come out of this, and not just maintain them, but develop them to the extent that they see you as the good guy. So you have a competitive advantage when you come out to all those equivalent of ultra capitalists who try to screw them during this, because for financial reasons, they have not done the right thing.
Yep.
I think the third thing is develop new relationships. Everyone is at home. Everyone is bored to tears and wants someone to talk to.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Okay. Just make arrangements to do a Skype call or a Zoom call with potential new clients. Okay. This is an opportunity to do that. So you are looking for the next stage of when we come out of lockdown. Okay. That leads on to the next question, which I guess is for Patrick as well. How do you secure SME business for the adversity? You've sort of answered that mainly, but
yeah, I think it's really through collaboration with your various stakeholders. Bear in mind, okay, one thing that I always tell the companies that I sort of work with is, in times like this, you really got to engage your vendors and your stakeholders, right? Because we are all in this together. So what it means is that it's a time to leverage those relationships, right? So your payment schedule would need to change. For all you know, they are looking at your business in a different way, such that they are willing to invest. All right. So don't just look at them as just your supplier. Don't just look at them as your vendor. They could be your business partners. They could be your investor. And in time to come, it could be even the vertical integration. All right. So again, planning as well as cutting down unnecessary expenses will be very important in this current climate, but at the same time, with an eye on expansion.
Okay, very good. So a couple of specific questions, one we've sort of half answered. The first is, should I consider pivoting to other businesses as my current business model is significantly impacted by COVID?
Okay, at least to me, right, it really depends on many factors, right? Because this COVID situation, it really depends on whether it's a long-term or short-term. Nobody knows for now, right? Then you got to look inwards and see whether has your business model become unviable, all right? Or if you think that it is just temporary, then the outcome and the objective will be very different. The steps that you're going to take will be very different, right? So there are mitigating steps that you can take if you think that this is just going to be a short term. Your business model is still viable in the longer term, right? But if you do an assessment and realize that in the overall macro environment, people are going to e-commerce, there's a change in working habits, and so on and so forth, and your business model clearly it becomes you're no longer scalable, right? Then you got to change, right? And you got to change quickly because you could be out of business very soon and out of cash.
Yeah. So in my line of business, what we've done is pivot to a certain extent. So I keep the core business going, but actually have a coronavirus business as well. So obviously it's much easier to do in life sciences. So our gene therapy company, which does manufacturing, is now manufacturing vectors for the new vaccines. You know, this is short-term income. Obviously, it's very easy to get an income. All those life science diagnostics companies are now obviously doing coronavirus diagnostics, even if they weren't before. So, you know, in the life science space, a lot of companies are pivoting to that space. But even in AI, you know, we have an AI company. They are now doing data analytics for the new trials for coronavirus drugs. So you know, even though they were doing cybersecurity before, they've just pivoted their data analytics to a new space, and they're getting money. They are actually getting money for that space.
Yeah.
We've got one specific question before we move on to the next one. Maybe I should answer this one. So someone has actually asked, how do I sort out the import-export when the 90% of aviation is down and 80% of labor is working from home? Okay, we've partnered. We have actually licensed our technology to partners in other countries, and particularly to keep business going. So some countries haven't gone to lockdown. So those countries that have not gone into lockdown yet. And of course, there's always countries coming out of lockdown. So we have, obviously, it's very easy for us in Finland to have Sweden as a partner, but Sweden does not have a lockdown. So we've just licensed our technology to a Swedish manufacturer, and they're selling our products. They get 10%, we still get 90% of revenue coming through. China is also now coming out of lockdown. For Singapore, I would consider going into having partners in China. Obviously, you are developing a new market, even if your own home market is not viable. Okay, so that would be my answer to that.